Welcome back to Love Unscripted, everyone. I'm Clara.
And I'm Leo. We're so excited to be diving into today's topic, cultural dating differences, love around the world.
That's right. Last week, we dove deep into the digital dating landscape, but today we're going global, exploring how cultural backgrounds influence romantic connections across English-speaking countries.
I'm particularly excited about this one, Clara. Having dated people from different cultural backgrounds, I've experienced firsthand how those differences can create both beautiful moments and occasionally some hilariously awkward misunderstandings.
Same here. I once dated someone from Australia who kept using slang I didn't understand. Took me 3 dates to figure out that when he said something was ace, he meant it was excellent, not that it had something to do with playing cards.
That's brilliant. Well, we've got a packed episode today. We'll be exploring dating norms across North America, British and European customs, dating down under in Australia and New Zealand, navigating cross-cultural relationships, and even how relationship milestones vary globally.
Let's jump right in.
Let's start by talking about dating in North America, a place with amazing regional diversity in dating customs. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, dating felt pretty casual to me.
That's so interesting. I'm from the Midwest originally, and there was definitely more of a traditional approach. Like you'd often meet the parents fairly early on, and there was kind of an expectation that dating would lead somewhere.
Exactly. I've noticed that too when visiting friends in more rural parts of the country. Dating in Seattle felt very different from when I spent that summer in Nebraska with my cousin.
And the urban-rural divide is huge. In major cities like New York or LA, it's common to date multiple people casually before becoming exclusive, while in smaller towns, exclusivity might be assumed much earlier.
For sure. Religion plays a major role too, right? I mean, in some communities, dating is still very much tied to marriage expectations from the start.
Absolutely. I was just reading this article in the Huffington Post about a woman who found herself in a relationship where religious differences became a real challenge. She's Jewish and wanted Jewish traditions in her wedding, while her partner wanted a Greek Orthodox ceremony.
Oh, that's a tough one. Did they work it out?
Unfortunately not, but what really struck me was her emphasis on communicating about potential deal breakers early. She wrote, I learned the hard way that when it comes to dating, you have to discuss those boundaries sooner rather than later, or else your relationship can end up in trouble.
That's such valuable advice. I think sometimes we're so excited about the chemistry and connection that we forget to have those deeper conversations about values and expectations.
100%. And what's interesting is how generational shifts are changing these dynamics too. Millennials and Gen Z are dating and marrying later than previous generations, especially in North America.
And they're more open to non-traditional relationship structures too, whether that's long distance, openly non-monogamous relationships, or just redefining what commitment looks like for them.
The landscape is definitely evolving. So let's hop across the pond and talk about British and European dating customs. This is where things get really interesting to me. So, Leo, you spent a semester in London during college, right? What differences did you notice in the dating scene there compared to back home?
Oh my gosh, where do I even start? The British approach to dating is so much more understated. There's this wonderful subtlety to it. People don't typically go on formal dates as much. It's more like fancy grabbing a pint.
Yes. My British friend always tells me that Americans are way too direct about dating. She says in the UK, people often hang out in groups first, and romance develops more organically without explicitly calling it dating.
That's spot on. And pub culture is central to the whole thing. The local pub isn't just for drinking, it's a social hub where relationships naturally develop. I met this guy James at my local pub, and we hung out 6 times before I realized we were actually dating.
That's hilarious. I can totally see how that confusion happens. And there's such a difference between Northern and Southern European approaches to romance, too. I spent a summer in Italy, and the dating style there was so much more passionate and expressive than what you're describing in Britain.
Absolutely. Southern European cultures tend to be more open with their feelings from the start. My Spanish friend Miguel is always teasing me about how reserved Americans can be on early dates, all that calculated texting and waiting periods.
And Brexit has actually had some interesting impacts on international dating in Europe. I was reading that dating apps have had to adjust their algorithms and features to account for the changing relationship between the UK and continental Europe.
That makes sense. I imagine it's affected long-distance relationships too, with changing visa situations. Dating across borders is already complicated enough.
Speaking of international relationships, I just remembered this fascinating piece I saw in the New York Times Vows column about a couple, Mishti Rahman and Philip Canis, who celebrated their wedding 3 different times to honor both their Bangladeshi and Greek cultural backgrounds.
That's beautiful. What a wonderful way to blend traditions. Did they do all 3 celebrations in the same location?
The article didn't specify exactly, but it mentioned they wanted to pay tribute to both their cultures as well as include their friends. I just love stories like that, finding creative ways to honor different backgrounds rather than seeing them as obstacles.
It reminds me that differences don't have to be deal breakers. They can actually enrich a relationship if both people approach them with openness and respect.
Absolutely. Now, let's head down under and talk about dating in Australia and New Zealand. I've always been fascinated by their dating culture.
Australia and New Zealand have such a fascinating dating culture. I was lucky enough to spend 3 months in Sydney a few years back, and the relaxed approach to dating really stood out to me.
I've heard that. Isn't there much less pressure and formality compared to dating in the US?
100%. Everything is so much more casual. People use the term seeing someone rather than dating a lot of the time, and first dates are often just grabbing a coffee or going for a walk on the beach rather than some elaborate dinner.
That sounds so refreshing. I feel like in the US, there's sometimes this expectation that dates need to be these perfectly planned affairs with lots of thought and money invested.
Exactly. And the outdoor lifestyle really influences dating there too. I went on a first date that was a sunrise hike, followed by breakfast at a beachside cafe. Would never have thought of that here, but it was fantastic.
That sounds amazing. Much better than sitting awkwardly across from each other at a restaurant trying to make small talk. The activity gives you something to do together.
There's also an interesting difference between urban and rural dating experiences there. In Sydney or Melbourne, it's quite cosmopolitan and similar to other major cities. But in smaller towns or rural areas, there's more of a community aspect where everyone knows each other.
I can imagine that creates a very different dynamic. My friend who grew up in rural New Zealand said, everyone basically dated within their extended social circle, and your reputation really mattered because word traveled fast.
That's so true. And speaking of New Zealand, I found their dating culture to be even more laid back than Australia's, if that's possible. There's this wonderful authenticity to it, less game playing and more just being yourself from the start.
I love that approach. Maybe we could learn something from that here. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts on navigating cross-cultural relationships. That's where things can get really interesting and sometimes challenging.
Cross-cultural relationships can be so incredibly rewarding, but they definitely come with their own unique set of challenges. Communication is at the heart of most relationship issues, but when you add cultural differences to the mix, there's even more potential for misunderstandings.
Absolutely. That article one mentioned earlier about the woman who was culturally Jewish dating someone Greek Orthodox really highlights this. She wrote that she was open to blending my traditions with my partners, just like we'd blend the rest of our lives. But ultimately, they had different expectations around wedding traditions that created conflict.
That's such a common challenge. I dated someone from a very different cultural background a few years ago, and we had to navigate everything from differing family expectations to communication styles. Even simple things like how we expressed affection in public required conversation.
Meeting the family can be particularly tricky in cross-cultural relationships, right? Different cultures have such varied expectations around when and how you meet your partner's family and what that step signifies.
Oh my gosh, yes. In some coaches, meeting the family happens early and is fairly casual. In others, it's a major milestone that signifies serious commitment. I remember being caught off guard when a partner from a different background invited me to family dinner after just 3 weeks of dating.
And then there's the whole question of whose cultural traditions take precedence for holidays, celebrations, or, as that article highlighted, weddings. Finding that balance can be tricky.
What I've found works best is approaching differences with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Asking questions like, what does this tradition mean to you? Or how important is this in your culture? Creates space for understanding.
I love that approach. And celebrating differences rather than just tolerating them. Like, instead of seeing different traditions as obstacles to overcome, viewing them as opportunities to experience something new together.
Exactly. Some of my favorite memories are from participating in cultural traditions with partners that were completely new to me. It deepened our connection and broadened my worldview.
That reminds me of something else from that Huffington Post article. She mentioned staying true to her identity and being proud of that, even though the relationship ultimately didn't work out. I think that's so important in cross cultural relationships, finding that balance between openness to your partner's culture while honoring your own.
100%. Successfully navigating cultural differences isn't about one person completely adopting the other's way of life. It's about creating something new together that respects both backgrounds.
And that brings us nicely to our next topic, digital dating across borders. Technology has made international dating more accessible than ever before. Digital dating has completely transformed how people connect across national borders. Apps like Tinder Passport and Hinge allow you to match with people anywhere in the world now.
It's amazing how technology has opened up possibilities for international connections. I have a friend who met her husband on a language exchange app. She was in Toronto learning Italian, he was in Rome learning English. 3 years later, they're married and living in London.
That's such a sweet story. But international dating definitely comes with unique challenges too. Time zones can be a real obstacle to building connection in those early stages.
Tell me about it. I briefly dated someone in Australia, and the 14-hour time difference meant one of us was always either just waking up or about to go to sleep during our calls. Not exactly prime time for deep conversations.
I can imagine. And then there's the language barrier aspect. Even between English speaking countries, there can be significant differences in slang, humor, and communication styles.
Absolutely. I mentioned dating someone from Australia, and even though we both spoke English, there were definitely moments of confusion. She would use phrases like, I'm keen, or that's rubbish, that just aren't common in American English.
I had a similar experience with a British guy the first dated. He told me he was chuffed about something, and I had no idea if that was good or bad. Turns out it means he was very pleased, but I had to Google it discreetly during a bathroom break.
That's hilarious. These little cultural and linguistic differences can lead to some funny misunderstandings, but they can also add a layer of complexity to forming connections.
Definitely. And despite those challenges, there are some beautiful success stories out there. That New York Times Owls column we mentioned earlier featured a couple who met on a cruise ship and built a relationship that bridged different cultures and even involved learning sign language.
That's beautiful. And there was that other couple they featured who got married in Antarctica because they were such avid travelers and had visited every other continent together. Talk about a global romance.
I think what these success stories have in common is a willingness to put in extra effort to bridge differences, whether those are cultural, linguistic, or geographical.
That's so true. International relationships often require more intentional communication and planning than dating someone locally. But many couples find that navigating those challenges together actually strengthens their bond.
Speaking of strengthening bonds, let's talk about how relationship milestones vary across different cultures. This is fascinating to me.
Relationship milestones really do vary dramatically across cultures. What might be considered a major step in one culture could be relatively casual in another.
Absolutely. Take exclusivity, for example. In American dating culture, there's often that defining DTR conversation, define the relationship, where you explicitly agree to be exclusive. But in many European countries, exclusivity is assumed from the moment you start dating.
That's such a good example. I have a friend from France who was completely confused by American dating culture when she moved here. She couldn't understand why the guys she was seeing continued to use dating apps after their third date.
I can imagine her frustration. And then there's meeting the family. In some cultures, that happens very early and is fairly casual. In others, it's a sign that things are getting serious.
Exactly. In many collectivist cultures, family approval is sought much earlier in the relationship process. I dated someone from a close-knit Filipino family, and meeting her parents happened within the first month, which felt very quick coming from my American perspective.
And different cultures have such varied timelines around major commitment steps, too. The average time before engagement or marriage can differ dramatically between regions.
For sure. In some parts of the United States, particularly in more religious communities, it's not uncommon for couples to get engaged after less than a year. But in places like the UK or Australia, many couples live together for several years before considering marriage.
And the concept of marriage itself carries different weight in different cultures. In some communities, it's still seen as the ultimate goal of dating, while in others, it's just one of many valid relationship structures.
That's so true. I have friends in Scandinavia who have been together for over a decade, own a home, and have children together, but have no plans to get married. It's just not seen as a necessary step there.
And integrating traditions when partners come from different backgrounds can be both beautiful and challenging. Going back to that example from the NYT Vows column, minus the couple who celebrated their wedding 3 different times to honor both Bangladeshi and Greek traditions, that's such a creative approach.
I love that. Instead of seeing cultural differences as obstacles, they made them central to their celebration. That's the kind of creative approach that can make cross-cultural relationships so rich and meaningful.
Exactly. And I think that's the beautiful thing about relationships in our increasingly connected world. We have the opportunity to create new traditions that honor multiple cultural backgrounds. As we wrap up today's exploration of cultural dating differences, I think one thing is clear. While dating norms vary widely across the globe, meaningful connection is something everyone is seeking.
Absolutely. Whether you're grabbing a pint in London, going for a beach walk in Sydney, or swiping on apps in New York, at the heart of it all is the desire to find someone who gets you.
And I think there's so much we can learn from different cultural approaches to dating. The British understated style, the Australian relaxed attitude, the importance of family in many cultures, they all have their merits.
100%. I find myself increasingly appreciating that direct communication style we talked about in North American dating culture. Being clear about expectations early on can prevent so much heartache later.
That Huffington Post article really highlighted that, didn't it? The author emphasized the importance of discussing potential deal breakers early, particularly around cultural or religious traditions that matter to you.
Exactly. But I also love the more organic approach to relationship development that's common in British dating culture or in New Zealand. Less pressure and more focus on genuine connection.
I think the ideal might be taking the best elements from different cultural approaches, the straightforwardness of American dating, the relaxed attitude of Australian dating, the community focus of many collectivist cultures.
And above all, approaching cultural differences with curiosity and respect rather than judgment. That seems to be the common thread in successful cross-cultural relationships.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered so much ground today, from regional dating norms in North America to British pub culture, from relaxed Australian approaches to navigating cross-cultural relationships.
We sure have. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed this global tour of dating customs as much as we have. Remember, cultural differences don't have to be obstacles. They can actually enrich your dating experience if you approach them with an open mind and heart.
Beautiful way to put it, Leo. And next week, we'll be shifting our focus a bit to explore something that's fundamental to all relationships, romantic or otherwise, friendship.
That's right. Our next episode, Friendship First, the foundation of lasting connections, will examine how strong friendships form the basis for all meaningful relationships. We'll look at the science of friendship formation, finding your people in adulthood, maintaining connections through life transitions, and even how friendships sometimes blossom into romance.
I'm so excited for that one. As someone who believes that my strongest romantic relationships have all started with solid friendships, I think this topic is absolutely crucial.
Me too. And we'd love to hear from our listeners about their experiences navigating cultural differences in dating, or how friendship has played a role in their romantic lives. Please share your stories with us.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with friends who might be navigating cross-cultural relationships or just interested in dating norms around the world. Your support helps our podcast grow.
This has been Love Unscripted. I'm Leo.
And I'm Clara. Join us next week for more unfiltered conversations about love, friendship, and everything in between. See you then.